very special week. We are here with Helen Irlen. Helen is the founder of the Irlen Center and now centers all around the world. She is an internationally recognized educator, researcher, therapist, scholar, and expert in the area of visual perceptual problems. She's a graduate of Cornell University. She's been in the field of education for over 40 years. That sort of sucks that we've done this stuff for so long. She spent 15 years as a school psychologist and 30 years as a child and family therapist, an educational therapist. She's the founder and director of the Adult Learning Disabilities Program, assistant professor of adult learning disabilities at Cal State Long Beach, instructor in psychology at Cornell. But, you know, Helen and I met, oh my goodness, it's got to be 25 years ago.
At least.
And
Absolutely.
if I remember right, you were giving a presentation at an adult ADD conference and at the University of Michigan. And when I first heard about your work, I thought, oh, no, that can't be possible, because I never learned about it in medical school, and I never learned about it in my general psychiatric residency or my child psychiatric residency. And so, as many people do to my work, they just dismiss it because they don't know about it. But then what happened is I had a friend whose wife had severe migraines. And when she put on blue tinted lenses, she's not had a migraine since, and you know how debilitating that is. And so Helen is the founder of the Irlen Syndrome. It's something I think about, I talk about nearly every day in my clinical practice. It has changed the lives of countless people. And Tana's got a great story
I do.
about her sister. But welcome. Thank you for spending
Yes.
this week with us.
We're so excited to have you.
And tell us how you discovered this.
Yes.
What's the backstory?
Oh, good. That's always an interesting concept. Backstory is, I guess, one, that I'm a divergent thinker and that I think outside the box. And I have been a school psychologist testing children, doing all the psychoeducational testing for a number of years. And every time I tested a child that I couldn't identify as having a problem, and I went back into the classroom and watched that child struggle, it bothered me. I was saying, what are we missing from all the testing that we do? What are we missing? What are we not asking? Questions we're not asking? What are we not identifying? Whereas typically, everyone assumes if I give you a psychoeducational test or a neuropsych test, I'll identify all of the factors that are contributing to your struggling in school or continue to struggle as an adult. So I thought outside the box and said, no, it's not enough. We need to think in a different way and ask different questions. And I was lucky enough at that point to have the opportunity to do that, because I was asked to start the first program for adults with learning disabilities at Cal State Long Beach. And I started the program saying, fine, it was a federal grant. We're going to do three things. One is I want a research component to it. And two, I want a counseling component, because as you know, if you've struggled, it just doesn't automatically go away. Those kinds of issues, self-concept issues, stay with you for a lifetime. And the third thing is we wanted what I thought would be a remediation program for these adults, but actually turned into, and nobody talked about it then, accommodations, which we do now all the time. But we switched as an adult. As long as you had a way of getting there, even if you didn't have the skill, it didn't matter. So those were the three prongs. And it was fun because the adults had all been bright, highly articulate, and had struggled for a lifetime. And so they had parents who were really concerned because they couldn't understand, why are they so bright, but why do they continue to struggle? So they had been through testing, they had been through remediation, they had been through vision therapy. I could go on and on, but
So how did you discover it was light? That
why
was
did
the
I discover
problem.
it was light? That's always fun. That's like by chance. But we were going through all of the different methods that had ever been purported to help somebody who was struggling with reading. And not with this group that I had, who were bright, highly motivated, and had made it into a 4-year college, but still struggling, right? And one of the things finally we tried after trying multiple things was they used to believe that you had to have a dominant eye in order to read. And they did eye occlusions where they covered one eye to train the eye, and then they decided that wasn't working, so they used a red overlay and red-green glasses. And so I started with my group and trying this out, and we put the red overlay down, never even got to the red-green glasses, which blocked one eye, so they were basically reading with one eye. And one of my students, adult students, said to me, "You know, Helen, how you got me to recognize the fact that words aren't moving on the page? This is the first thing you've done with that red overlay that made it a little bit better." And that was the clue.
Oh.
And we went from that point to robbing the theater department and borrowing every color theatrical gel and had it all on the floor and have them go through, now that they understood first what they were seeing that they shouldn't be seeing on the printed page, and they selected some overlays.
This had to be a huge breakthrough for dyslexia.
It was such a huge breakthrough for them. But what was interesting to me is they came back and they found their overlay, used their overlay, documented where they had changes in reading rate, comprehension, flow,
Wow.
and fluency, and comfort, but then they complained, right? Like a bunch of children. You realize that I'm a therapist. Well, you made things better for us with reading. What about the fact that we're still struggling when we try to see things on whiteboards, when we're in under fluorescent lighting, the depth perception issues? And so they were the ones who educated me about all the other
What they needed.
all the other issues that they were having that were all related to the same thing.
Which is a visual processing problem.
When we go visual,
That
I have
makes
to go
so much
visual
sense.
brain processing, though, because when people hear vision, they think eye, and it's not your eye that reads.
Well, I guess
and
because I'm a
processes.
neuroscientist, I think of brain,
Brain.
right?
Yeah,
Because
you
it's
think
got to go
brain.
from your eye to your occipital cortex through your parietal lobes, and we've actually done a number of scans before and after the glasses. And it seems like certain colors of the light spectrum irritate the brain.
Oh, that's so
And that when
fascinating.
you put on the colored filtered lenses or the overlays, the irritation goes down and your brain actually settles down. The first time I saw this on a scan, I was completely blown away that we had a ring of fire scan, you know, this brain that was working way too hard, and it just settled it down. And
That's fascinating.
And it was stunning. So I went from my own ignorance to, wow, how many people, this would be a good question, in the population struggle with the Irlen Syndrome?
It varies depending on the population. General population, and where you can compensate for it, so you still can kind of be successful, but you're spending so much more time doing your work than anybody else, you know, and it's so uncomfortable to do it. That population is about 12 to 14%. When you're looking at those that have identified problems in terms of school and learning, and particularly reading or copying or math, that number jumps up to 26% or higher. It's higher.
So it's a significant percentage of the population. It's 10 times the number of people who have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It's about the same number of people who have ADD. And a lot of people with ADD or ADHD have the Irlen Syndrome, and they don't respond fully to the traditional treatments.
But this is really important because as a mom, I'm sitting here thinking, and I've been through this with some of my daughter's friends, and I've certainly been through my own issues with my daughter, you know, like we all go through as mothers, or as parents, I should say. It's painful to see your child struggle in school. And especially when they tell you there's nothing we can identify. Then you just start thinking, well, what is it? And people start saying, well, the thought comes up and maybe no one verbalizes it. Maybe they're just not that smart. And they start thinking that and feeling that from people.
Right.
And then acting
And that's a terrible
Okay.
thought.
So before we have to end this first podcast,
And that's not true. That's
what are the hallmark symptoms of the Irlen syndrome?
Hallmark
When should
symptoms.
people suspect it?
Okay. When you have children or adults and you find that you skip words, skip lines, lose your place when you're reading. So your reading becomes inefficient. And the other one is hard because people don't report it, and that is that you have to build breaks into reading. And if you stop and think about it, reading may be causing pain or strain or tiredness or sleepiness or even headaches or nauseous or dizziness. But nobody asks those questions. So nobody identifies it.
Well, you can't say nobody because we ask it on all of our intake forms.
Now.
Except for you. You guys are special.
For like a long time we've been doing this.
But you screen for Irlen.
And if you're struggling because nobody asks, there is no reading test that talks about how does it feel when you read at a certain point. It's how you ask that question, because these symptoms aren't always present. They don't start immediately. They take time. For some people, it's the first word. For other people, it's maybe 20 minutes before things start to happen and they need to take a break. So it varies. And because no one's asking the questions, whatever you experience, you think is normal. And you would be surprised about that. We had a student who had failed the bar twice come in to see us with his sister on one side and his father on the other side, because he insisted he was bright and he couldn't have Irlen and he didn't have a problem. So when I asked him what reading was like for him, he says, well, you know, I start to get tired and I start drinking coffee after about a page. And this is a law student. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I'm drinking coffee nonstop. And then I actually have to hold my eyelids open so they don't close so I'm able to read.
Wow.
He thought that was normal.
So reading issues, eye strain, light sensitivity, depth perception problems. One of those interesting things. And you can tell these people when you go to the mall. Because most of us, we just walk on the escalators.
Right.
And you're not even thinking about it because your brain automatically adjusts and processes. These people stand at the bottom of the escalators and they watch. And with a fair amount of anxiety, they get on the escalator.
Or I've seen people jump onto it. Like,
they also have trouble with sports because of the depth perception issues. It's more common after head trauma. And I know that's an area that you're passionate about.
Yep.
So when we come back, we're going to dive more into how do you know if you have the Irlen syndrome and what are some of the things you can do about it. Stay with us.
welcome back. We're here with Helen Irlen. We're having such an interesting conversation about the Irlen Syndrome. So thanks for being with us, Helen.
I love it.
And yeah, this is so much fun. And before we get started on more questions, I actually want to tell you a story because this has been so fascinating for me. And just like when I met Daniel, I'm like, yeah. ADD is like nonsense. So I kind of thought the same thing when I heard it, because I'm like this neurosurgical, hard-charging ICU nurse, right? Trauma nurse. So whenever I hear stuff that sounds sort of fluffy to me, I'm like, yeah, whatever. But I have to tell you a story. What made me a true believer, like a serious believer. So this is so interesting. I just wonder how many other people out there could benefit from this. So my sister... we're actually, I often say, I joke now, it's like, oh, I finally have a sister, not a project. And so she's like, we actually have a relationship now. But I always thought that she was just irresponsible. And it just irritated me because one of my top values is responsibility, right? It's like, you have to take responsibility. And I just felt like, what is your problem? Why can't you just be responsible? What is the matter with you? Because she would just do the goofiest things. And she was so clumsy. And she's been in 19 car accidents. And she would be driving and just drive off the side of the road and flip a car or like go into a ditch or run into something. And even when she came to my house.
Because she flipped the car.
with me in it.
You had it.
So yeah, and so I mean, it was just nonstop with this kid. And so she's 9 years younger than I am, and it just made me crazy. And so she stayed at my house a couple of years ago because a traumatic event happened. And I come outside, and she's parked on my curb, like pressed against my mailbox, and I'm like, it just never ends. I'm like literally gonna lose my mind with this girl. Like, I just can't do this anymore. And I'm just having these thoughts. And we're in the car, and Daniel's asked her a couple questions, and I like comment about the car on the curb. And Daniel literally hits the brakes, puts his hand over his mouth. He goes, I know what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I feel terrible. I didn't like think of it sooner. He goes, I know what's wrong. And he makes an appointment for her to come see you. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay. I'm like, you're just giving her an excuse.
And
because you know I'm mad.
Remember?
Well, it gets worse. So yeah, part of the problem was she literally, like, part of what was irritating me so badly was, and I was trying to figure it all out, she thought people were electronically harassing her. She thought, because she would look if there's fluorescent light going, she started to see laser beams. Mm-hmm. And so she sometimes they'd come from the floor, sometimes they'd come from the ceiling. Like, if it was a hard surface floor, she'd see them bouncing from the floor. And so she thought people were like beginning to harass her electronically. It began to get really weird. And so she would just freak out and not want to leave the house, and she'd stay in the dark. Like, she'd keep all the lights off in the house. Mm. It just got really weird. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do with this girl. So she comes to see you. And it just changed everything. Like, it literally changed. We don't let her drive yet, but it changed. But it changed everything. She doesn't see the light beams. She doesn't have anything. Now, she recognizes when we go places, if they have certain lights, she's like, I just can't sit under that light, but I have my glasses on. And now I know that those are not, I know it's from the light now. I don't feel like someone's doing something weird. Mm-hmm. So isn't that a crazy story? I mean, you hear them all the time.
All the time. Absolutely.
And do you think light pollution is causing more ADD, anxiety, depression with the fluorescent lights?
If you want to say light pollution in terms of the amount of time that people are spending on electronic devices, absolutely. The clients that we see now are so much more severe than they were even 10 years ago. They're coming in on the severe, and I used to say 17's my high score in terms of how severe you are, and a lot of them are coming in at 8 is severe. 17's was my top, and now they're coming in towards 17, 18, 19.
And that makes sense because everything we do is on a computer.
Everything is electronic. Absolutely. And you're under fluorescent lights that have gotten brighter and brighter. So they're under their most adverse environment trying to function, and they don't realize it.
And so it can affect them at work. It can affect them in school. It can affect them in their home. It's amazing. So if you suspect that this might apply to you or someone you love, Irlen, IRLEN.com is just a great resource for you. There are self-tests. Actually, when I'm in my office and I'm sort of suspecting this, I actually go to the website and I do the short test and I go, so how many of these 14 symptoms do you have? And it's often people have 8 or 9 or 12 of these symptoms. And I'm like, and I had this one girl from Oklahoma, and she'd been diagnosed with ADD and anxiety. And the medication helped, but not as much as we had thought. And she had terrible Irlen.
But it would make you anxious.
And when we got it treated, she actually saw her mother's whole face for the first time.
That's crazy.
Isn't that?
No, I hear all this.
But I have to say something.
I hear it all the time.
So I have to say something, though. Think about this. If you are seeing light beams coming at you, or you think you're being electronically harassed, or you can't read and you're in law school, that's going to cause some serious anxiety or depression.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you're trying as hard as you can. And the harder you try, the worse things get. So then what do? Right? I brought in, if you think of an optical illusion, and I brought an example of an optical illusion because that's what's happening to the brain. Basically, for my clients, The world becomes like an optical illusion for them.
Oh, wow.
And people don't even think, should I show one of these?
Yes.
Yeah.
So now, so those of you listening, you won't see the optical illusion, but we also record this and you can see it on YouTube. So there's this swirl pattern, at least that's what I see.
Yeah. And things can happen or change. Things can flicker or flash or shimmer. Things can move up and down. Things get blurry. Things can disappear and reappear. And so you're getting this happening, though, all the time. And the only way you can make it stop happening is to stop reading or copying or get out from under the fluorescent lighting. So you have to get away from it. And then you get labeled. And the labels can vary from ADD to just not trying hard enough to you need to pay more attention. And the kids just blame themselves because if they look at a page that looks like an optical illusion and they look at their neighbor's page, it looks exactly the same. So the issue is one of, well, they're seeing it just like I'm seeing it, then there must be something wrong with me. And the other thing you and I talked about is how we just assume a lot of the things we experience as normal. Like reading is supposed to put you to sleep.
Right.
Right? You told me your
story. Oh, yeah, I read
that.
to go to sleep.
Yeah. And how many out there read to go to sleep without realizing it, that there are people who can read for hours and hours and hours and never get tired or never get sleepy. Another comment that I hear a lot is, well, of course, everyone's going to get a headache. They just need to read long enough. And then you look around and the majority of the population doesn't get headaches from reading. So they're assuming that it's their problem and they don't even need to report it or tell anyone, and nobody asks them. I mean, no one asks them. There's not one test in school or psychoeducational battery that asks questions about how it feels.
So how do people get this? What causes it?
Two ways. One, you can inherit it. So it doesn't surprise me when you talked about reading put you to sleep, knowing that your sister's severe. You may not be as severe on the continuum. So you inherit it. And that's fun because we always talk to the children and say, well, we're going to find out if you have Irlen, who you inherited from, whether it's your mom, dad, or both. And that just immediately makes them feel better. It goes, it's not my fault. Right? Mom goes, I know, it's probably my fault, but either way. Or you can acquire it through head injuries, concussions, whiplash, or certain even medical conditions that are autoimmune related and certain medications that make you more light sensitive. It can be one or both. In terms of the concussions and TBIs, we're seeing a lot of workman's comp cases who have had auto accidents or accidents at work. And we've worked with 500 of our military men and women who have been over in Iraq and Afghanistan and experienced multiple blast injuries and have been living with a headache every minute of every day that become migraines once a day to twice a day with the nausea and dizziness. And they're all getting medically discharged and they have families to support. They can't go back to school because they can't be under fluorescent lighting. They can't read any longer. And we get them in the lenses and it changes their lives. And that's what I hear from every one of them. You've changed my life.
Wow.
I don't suffer anymore from headaches or migraines or eye pain or eye strain. I'm able to read and I think, and I have a future. Anger is another interesting issue. I had a mother, as we do pre and post and we do follow-ups, and I was talking to one of the Marines and I asked about anger and his wife grabbed the phone away from him and said, Helen, I need to tell you his anger was so bad that I would take the children and have to hide in a closet to protect us and the children. She said, since he's been wearing his Irlen spectral filters, we haven't been able to hide. We don't need to be in the closet at all anymore. So I want to thank you.
All right, stay with us.
That's
When
wild.
we come back, we're going to talk about traumatic brain injury and the Irlen Syndrome. Welcome back. We are here with Helen Irlen and talking about the Irlen Syndrome
So
and
interesting.
how colored filtered lenses can literally change your life. In this podcast, I want to talk about traumatic brain injury. So here at Amen Clinics, 40% of the patients we see have had a traumatic brain injury of significance at some
really?
point in their past. It is of epidemic proportions that no one knows. It's a major cause of psychiatric illness, anxiety, depression, temper problems, marital problems, domestic violence, and so on. And this is about 12 years ago, I started my NFL work, and we've scanned and treated about 300 NFL players. And I think half of them have the Irlen Syndrome. It's amazing that if you don't inherit it, that having a car accident, having played a contact sport, can often trigger headaches, irritability, reading problems, depth perception issues. And you can imagine if you're an NFL player and you get whacked a lot in the head, but if it gives you depth perception problems, even just a smidge, it can cost you millions of dollars in contracts because you're not going to be quite as good as you were. We actually have a number of hockey players as well, because head trauma is very common in hockey. And when we figure out they have the Irlen Syndrome, we'll actually tint their masks whatever color, and they become better hockey players. So talk about your experience with traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I guess one that's more prevalent. What I was thinking about as you were talking is it doesn't even have to be a sport that's necessarily thought of as a contact sport. Someone told me about synchronized swimming and how they get head injuries, and I went, what?
What?
And they go, well, they can be out of sync, and if they
Oh.
Hit heads.
and they hit heads. Cheerleading is another
Oh yeah,
one.
no, that one. There was a cheerleader. We saw it all the time.
So, I always quote your quote that the only safe sport that Daniel Amen says is ping pong, right?
Unless you're a grandson who got hit by the ping pong paddle.
Anyway, but that again has become very prevalent. We've seen 500 military men and women. And it's not identified in the military because they're not bleeding to death.
I'm not sure they would want to know.
Well, of course they would want to know because they'd be more accurate.
Yeah, but then they have to actually.
And they're
They had such a hard time even identifying TBI and PTSD.
But then they have to actually do something about it.
And it's hard to separate it out. So it's interesting for us because we do pre and post testing with everyone who we see who's had some type of head trauma, to look at which factors then we can eliminate and which ones are resistant and are really related to PTSD and some brain injury that we're not touching because we're basically dealing with, as you know, the visual cortex. So memory becomes resistant and one of the last ones to start to get better and has nothing to do what we do with. And a lot of times the sleep issues stay a problem for them because of the anxiety and the depression. But anything that we've been typically dealing with is able to get better. And so as I had mentioned before, they're able to now read before they could maybe get through a sentence to a half a page. So now they can be under fluorescent lighting without it triggering their headaches and their migraines, the nauseousness, the dizziness, the feelings of agitation and irritability, that feeling of, I just got to get out of here, fight or flight feelings. So they can be under fluorescent lighting, and they can think about going to school. They can think about going back to school, to having a career because they're going to be medically discharged. I see a lot now of car accident victims who it's not recognized by most neurologists, and so they've gone to.
They have no training, so it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, with the ophthalmologist, it's even worse. It doesn't exist. It's really shouldn't. They totally dismiss
So is there a
it.
controversy among the ophthalmology field and the optometrists? Because I know they also get involved in visual training and reading. And my optometrist who I adore. She's actually my cousin. She'd never heard of it, but she's open-minded. So she went and learned about it.
Right.
And she trusts me. And if I say, look, I have thousands of people we've diagnosed over the last 25 years, it radically changes their life. Why wouldn't you want to just pay attention to it? And the treatment is so simple.
It is simple as long as you know how to diagnose it. You can't self-diagnose because you don't know what it's supposed to look like or how it's supposed to feel. So the key to this is two things. One is to have someone who's been trained, who's an expert at asking the questions the right way, to be able to pull exactly what's happening that shouldn't be happening. And then two, the recognition that everyone's brain is uniquely different, just like we have uniquely different fingerprints. So no one color works for every person. We've done runs on thousands and thousands and thousands.
And you actually have some of the lenses here.
Yeah, I brought some of the lenses
Let me
along.
put one on and see.
Oh.
Yeah, this
Some of them
one was
have
wild. So
prescription.
it's sort of a pinkish lens, and when I put it on, it actually made things look more blue and crisp. So I thought that was pretty wild.
And,
Well, that actually makes me worse.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, that made me better.
and that's a good point.
We are
that
not the
if
same,
you're-
are we?
We are not. In
I wonder
so
if it
many
makes
But
ways.
everyone has a different.
conservative people more conservative.
Really?
No, it's getting back to what you said in terms of the brain's ability to
Wow, it's just
read
wild.
the wavelengths of light. That has
Yeah,
a
see, the
prescription in it.
ocean in the background on our screen is like bluer to me.
But the other thing that we do use before that is we want to make sure we don't put anybody in Irlen spectral filters unless they actually have the problem.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing. So I'm looking at your patterns and so I'm looking around. Nothing else looks different to me. It just looks crisper. Does that make sense? But I don't
looks
see
good,
change in
too.
patterns. I don't see change in light. I don't see.
So that's why the website, Irlen.com, has self-tests. So it's very easy to self-identify yourself or somebody if you have it. And then we do a screening. And again, we're looking at setting them up to look at certain patterns that will quickly pull that individual with the symptoms, if they have Irlen, that occur at some point when they're reading and doing visually intensive activities. So they get to look at, and they have to count one of the columns, and then they have to keep looking at it. And it's that sustained looking. not
Oh, no, see, I
looking
can't
away.
do that. I have to put my finger on it.
Right.
There's no way I could sit there
I
and.
keep telling you have Irlen.
No, I can't. And I can't do it with numbers either. If there's a whole bunch of zeros or a whole bunch of ones, I have to put my finger on it.
Well, and one of the things that we do after we
Because they start to all run together.
yeah. Oh, here we go. So
So we've had
We
a
use-
diagnostic.
we can do a diagnostic right here. But
Yeah, and the funny thing is,
Tana
I actually
episode.
was really good in math in school, but if numbers were a whole bunch of numbers together, I just had to like make sure that I wasn't
and
mixing
think
them
about
up.
the kids who have problems doing that. So then at this point with the screening, we use different colored overlays to make sure that we can stop the problem.
I just thought of something.
And it's that we can stop. And many times it's a combination of overlays or a combination of densities. It just depends on the individual's brain.
But I'm having all these like breakthrough moments right now. I have
Yeah.
to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
So it makes sense to me all of a sudden. Is that why like maybe like some people like me better and my daughter actually better in things like I was better in algebra than I was in basic math because the numbers would like I'd have to like slow down and look at the numbers to make sure I wasn't mixing them up. My
Right.
daughter's the same thing. She's not as good in basic math as she is in geometry
Right.
because the formulas are not hard.
Right.
It's the numbers
and
that
numbers and columns.
the columns.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my, no.
But when we
Well, I
come
don't have
up
my
with the
regular-
right
but I don't have my
if we
regular
come-
glasses
If we come
on.
up with the right colored overlay, here are the numbers. They're in
Yeah, there's
columns.
no way.
And for many people, it merges together. It doesn't stay straight.
Oh, I
And
would have never thought of
certain
myself
colors can make it
An
better.
accountant would have made me psychotic.
Crazy. Certain colors, and what I'm doing is putting different colors down over it.
I need to get my regular glasses though. to
That's
see
okay.
that.
I'm just showing you. The
Yeah, but
difference.
this color
And
looks
certain
great.
colors can make it better, but certain colors can make it worse. That's what playing with colors is dangerous. You can oversaturate the brain and create more symptoms without realizing it.
So interesting.
So we come up with the right color. We make sure They're given a color, their overlays to go home, read with, to make sure that this is making a difference. And then they come back and then for their second appointment, and we come up with a color that they can wear. The appointment for the screening is about an hour and a half, but to come up with the right color when you're wearing it is about a 2-hour appointment, 2.5 hour appointment.
That's trippy. This
Yeah.
is like
And
so
you
many.
have centers.
I have centers all in 46 countries now, and I don't know, screeners all throughout the U.S. And those are listed again on Irlen.com, so people can go and they can get online and play with it. What's fun is on the website we have colored glasses on top. And so you can change the page and try reading with the different
Yeah, and that's
colored
another
glasses.
question I have, because I remember even when I was in college, I can't remember where I heard it. Someone told me they had to change the background screen on their computer.
Right.
Now, could that have something? Is that a similar type thing while you're typing?
But that's what they're doing. They're coming up with a concept. So they change
Similar.
it. Yes,
So they
best
can read better.
concept for those who have Irlen is to have it the opposite. Instead of a white background, a black background with white print. A lot of people are lowering the brightness. You actually up your brightness, again, to compensate for it. But it exists all the time, and you're paying a price. And Daniel, you know that they pay a price in terms of when their brain is under stress, their health and well-being, not just the performance.
So interesting.
Because you don't skip.
So when we come back, I have a story that's one of my favorite stories that I often tell a lot about a before and after scan. And you'll want to hear this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are here with Helen Irlen this week. We're talking about the Irlen Syndrome and visual processing issues.
Fascinating.
And one of my favorite all-time stories is a woman came to see us at Amen Clinics who had what I call the holy trinity of Amen Clinics, which is ADD, anxiety, and depression. We see a lot of that. And through our intake questionnaire, we went, oh, she probably has Irlen. And so we sent her over to your center in Long Beach. And just by random chance, if you believe in random chance, my sister was over there with one of my nephews because there are a number of people in my family that has this. And I got a call. I'm in with a patient. And so I ignored the call from my sister. And then like a minute later, she called me again. And then when she called me again, I thought my mother had died. And I'm like, what? And she said, you can't believe what just happened. I'm like, what just happened? She said, this woman you sent over to the Irlen Center, when she put on the glasses, the bookcase came out from the wall. The doorknob came out from the door. And she saw a guy walk by who had a pot belly. And she blurts out pot belly because she'd never seen it because she really wasn't fully seen in 3D. Right. So her depth perception
That's wild.
was off. And I'm like, wow. And so I called you and I then went, well, let's scan her tomorrow. And she had a very busy brain, especially I think where I have sort of pinpointed the Irlen syndrome. It's the posterior insular cortex. So the insular cortex runs right between the frontal and temporal lobes, but the back part of it is involved in visual processing. But for her whole brain calmed down. And I'm like so excited because, you know, I love success stories. But a week later, she came back and she was clinically depressed. And I'm like, oh my God. And I didn't know the rest of the story. That when she was 12 years old, she was a prodigy guitar player. And she was really good and was giving concerts. But she couldn't learn to read music because whenever she would read music, the notes would move or dance on the page. And at the age of 12, she took her guitar by its throat and broke it and never played again. And this is 30 years ago because now she's 42. And the reason she got depressed she began to mourn the loss of what could have been if somebody would have known what she had. Now, that is not a Prozac moment. That's a moment to help her mourn the loss and then get to a place of gratitude for, I'm not going to have to do this anymore, suffer with it. My children aren't going to have to suffer with it, and so on. And I know you hear stories like that.
It's interesting how many of our adults, when we get them in the right color and things calm down and they realize what it should be like, cry.
Right.
And what they're crying is, it's an immediate, just a physical reaction. They're mourning the loss of whatever it is, the career that they could have gone into. I had, just like you, a musician who came in, and I said, what do you do? And he says, I tune pianos. And I said, is that what you've always done? He said, no, I was really gifted, and I was even asked to go out on tour with Peter, Paul, and Mary. Those of you who are older don't know. It's okay.
Yes, now we are.
Anyway, and he said, and I had to give it up. I couldn't read music. And when I put his right color down, or the right color combination of overlays down on a music page for him, he went, and I said, what? He said, you mean the notes aren't supposed to be moving in time to the music? And then he realized he gave up a whole career of his life, just like you said.
And the thing that I'm like, so I'm having all these like things go through my head now, and I have no idea if I have this, but I'm beginning to wonder. So the thing is that I'm sort of, so for people listening, if you're a little like me, I'm like one of those people who's like extreme take responsibility type of person, hard charging, just do it, make it work. And so when something's not working perfectly, it takes me a little time because I'm like, okay, just deal with it. But then, like, even with ADD, which I just thought was complete nonsense until I really realized what it meant and what it is and how much it can affect your life. And then I realized my mom has ADD from hell and how much different my life could have been. And then when I even saw my own, I'm like, I have a pretty successful life. But when I really realized, wow, that doesn't mean I met my potential. Or even though maybe I did do some really cool things, it didn't need to be that hard.
Yeah, it's how much extra
It didn't
energy
need to
and
be that
effort.
hard.
I mean, I have girls especially who will put in that extra energy and effort. So they'll stay up till 2, 3 in the morning in high school to get the reading done, to finish their homework. And then they get to college, and by the first, semester, they feel like they're a year behind because now they can't just stay up till 2 and 3 in the morning and work weekends. It's not enough for them. And then they get misdiagnosed as having anxiety and depression and put on medication.
And then they end up on medications that can actually make it worse.
And one last question.
And then multiple medications because it's not working.
That's not working. So let's do more, right?
So one last practical question for people, Helen, is when they come in to get screened and you're finding these colors for them, do they need to come in with their own prescription already, or do you actually test for a prescription as well?
No. That we leave to the vision specialist.
Okay.
We're not vision specialists.
So they need to come in with their...
Right. They need to see their optometrists and ophthalmologists and they've had to take care of their vision first, remember?
Okay.
But then we do, because the brain, that's why you have an occipital lobe, right? And the visual cortex. That's because it has to read and process the visual information. Okay.
And so you just put the color over...
We add it to the prescription if they wear a prescription.
Got it. Okay, that's what I needed to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what else do people need to know? So Irlen.com, there's self-tests. If you're irritable, if you have reading problems, depth perception.
You get tired.
Problems. You have problems with night driving.
Night driving we hadn't mentioned. Absolutely.
The lights bother you.
If fluorescent lights bother you.
One of my doctors has this. And whenever we're going to go have lunch together afterwards, and the room is going to be dark. And I'm like, put on your glasses.
Oh, it drives me crazy when I go to my sister's house and it's completely dark.
Yeah.
I'm like, because I need light. So I'm the opposite. I'm like, oh my God, I can't see anything.
But you have two profiles. The majority of the population needs and works under dimmer lighting and prefers dimmer lighting. But we have a smaller group that prefers and needs brighter lights. If you don't have the problem, it doesn't matter whether it's dim light or bright light.
Yeah, I don't like fluorescent, but I do need light.
Yeah. Well, and fluorescence is a big issue. And where do you go today that you're not under fluorescent lighting? And you think about all the triggers. They're all environmental triggers that trigger this. That's the classroom environment. You're reading on black on white. You're under fluorescent lighting. You have to do it for longer and longer periods of time to be successful. And they don't know to complain because everyone else around them looks like they're being successful. And it just affects so many areas of their lives that you talk about.
Can you get contacts?
Yes.
Okay.
We do yes, you're processing all this, I can tell. And we only tint the center portion so it doesn't change the color of your eyes.
Oh, interesting.
So a
Okay.
lot of professionals choose to wear the contacts.
Yeah, I actually don't really like them, but I know a lot of people who would want
To wear
contacts, so.
contact lenses.
Especially children, because a lot of kids, they don't want to wear glasses. They don't want to be different. How do you help them?
Yeah, it's harder with children. Part of it for me is the fact when there's a big difference between being successful and unsuccessful. If you wear them, you explain it. So we like the children or the parent or someone to go in and explain it to the class. Everyone looks at it and goes, oh, okay, I understand. I get it. And they don't get teased anymore. I had one football player I saw on campus, and he must have been wearing orange lenses that were even brighter than these lenses. And I said, well, how do you deal with it? And he goes, nobody fools with me. So we have to teach the kids that this is really important. Sometimes I'll play with it and say, fine, use it at home, use it to work to, when you're doing your homework and when you're taking tests, if you don't want to feel different. Sometimes I put it back on the parent. I had one child I saw 3 times. Without his Irlen filters, he read at a 3rd grade level. With his Irlen filters, he read where he was at a 7th grade level.
Oh, interesting.
That you can't play around with.
It's a medical issue.
Yeah,
It's
you
a
can't
medical
deal with it. So mom brought him back in, and he wasn't wearing them. And I said, fine. And he's kind of a chunky kid, and I knew he liked to eat. And I said, well, you know what? I've seen you twice now for the same reason you refuse to wear your own filters. We've proved both times to you how significant it is. How would you like to come live with me? Because at my house, if you don't wear your Irlen filters, you don't get to eat dinner. I never saw him again.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us.
So
Go to
fun.
irlen.com,
Okay.
learn a lot more about Helen's work. Do you have the Irlen Syndrome? What you can do about it. They have contacts to centers all over the world.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're interested in coming to Amen Clinics, use the code PODCAST10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.